So Lafayette came, and the State House was not here, but it was next door. That's where we had hoped to have the outdoor assemblage, but due, as Steve said, to the dicey situation yesterday anyway, for today, it was decided to move this indoors. But were we on site, I want you to visualize the first State House that was here in Montpelier. It's
over there on the wall.
It's over there, so it's the one to the left of the two buildings that are on that wall. And I'm even going to pass this around so that you can see it a little closer. So we'll pass an engraving, because there's really only a woodcut that shows that old State House. Very few other references. There are several woodcuts that show it actually. And yet, we have a very complete description of that building. And one of the uncharacteristic things about it, we always call it a wooden meeting house, because it was definitely in the tradition of New England meeting houses. But it was also a building that had two balconies above the first floor with windows all the way around and a single legislative chamber, because it had been built for the General Assembly of Vermont, which at that time consisted of only one body. And it was called Representatives Hall on the inside, and there was no other chamber. The top floor was where the governor's office was located, and the council chamber for the Council of Censors, which was the other body that helped to govern Vermont. And yet, the reality of such a State House, built in 1808, after many years from 1777 until that year, migrating legislative sessions east and west of the Green Mountains. In 1808, they started coming to Montpelier on a regular basis. The land for building that State House was donated very generously by Thomas Davis, the son of Colonel Jacob Davis, the original settler of Montpelier, and he generously donated the land, knowing that he intended to construct a hotel next door. And the hotel was more frequently used, perhaps, than the State House, I'm guessing. And that has been the symbiotic relationship that we have always enjoyed with what is now called the Pavilion, but has always been on this site in a number of buildings. The most recent of which is now a 1971 office building that recreated the old 19th century lobby of the Pavilion Hotel right here. So it is good that we're in this building, because this would have been the other building right next to that State House. And this is where a banquet was held to honor Lafayette. I have no idea what Steve is planning to roll before us, but it could be a banquet. We'll wait and see. And he addressed the throng initially from the balcony above the entrance to that old State House, but eventually they went indoors to Representatives Hall. And that is where the ceremony was held. That is where the addresses of various officials took place inside the old State House next to this site. So we're going to hear today from two eminent people. We're going to lead off, as is traditional, with Vermont governors. And the governor of the state of Vermont back then was Cornelius Van Ness, who had met Lafayette down in Windsor when he crossed the Connecticut River into the state from New Hampshire earlier in the day. And then Governor Van Ness accompanied him all the way through Vermont to his own hometown of Burlington. We're going to hear a little from Peter Riley, who, as I understand it, heads up the American Friends of Lafayette, the organization that has made this amazing reenactment of 6,000 miles, 24 states, and Vermont, which didn't exist as a part of the United States during the Revolution itself, would participate as among the final states on that pilgrimage. So it's suitable that we're hearing from Peter, who concocted this amazing pilgrimage with his organization. And we're very grateful to welcome you as Governor Cornelius Van Ness.
General Lafayette, I'd like to That's okay. I just want to make sure. I'm almost.
No.
Okay. General Lafayette, it was great meeting you this morning and traveling with you for the last. Now we're here with the people of Montpelier, and you're here at our state capitol, and the effusions of our gratitude towards you for allowing us to have all we have here now that was carved out of the wilderness in the lifetimes of many of the people here can be attributed to our institutions of Republican government and freedom, and we owe those to the veterans out there who fought in the Revolution, and more than many, other than Washington, to yourself, sir. And just you can we perhaps cannot give the greatest. We perhaps cannot equal in pomp and circumstance some of the other states that have been longer established. But your satisfaction to know that all these people feel secure in their government and will defend it with their lives is, I believe, a substantial reward for you. Thank you, sir.
The other big speaker that day was Elijah Payne. And Elijah Payne, I think it's safe to say, was probably selected for the principal oration marking this occasion because he was definitely an elder statesman, and an elder statesman who fought in the revolution. And many Vermonters were no longer alive in 1825 who had fought back then. He was perhaps the most eminent elder statesman left, and consequently, he taught. He was a federal judge at that time, but he started his career fairly early as a United States Senator from Vermont, and then went on to serve on the Supreme Court of Vermont as well. Portraying him today is perhaps the elder statesman of Vermont historians, Howard Coffin, as Elijah Payne.
General Lafayette, the citizens of Montpelier and the vicinity have assembled to bid you welcome to this recently erected village. And it gives me great pleasure that I am made their organ on this joyful occasion. We can say but little that you have not heard from millions of others. We acknowledge with deep gratitude your toils and your sacrifices in the time of our greatest need. Your contemporaries admired the gallantry of your earlier days in the cause of freedom and of a people contending for the right of self-government. And all the friends of liberty have revered your character in more advanced life for your uniform adherence to the principles of national liberty. We congratulate you on having nearly completed the tour of the United States in health, and hope you have received great pleasure and satisfaction in witnessing the fruits of your early toils and sacrifices in the improvement and prosperity of a widely extended republic. We believe you have seen a great nation enjoying the blessings of liberty without licentiousness. When you left this country after the War of Revolutions, the state of Vermont had just begun to have a name. At that time, almost the whole state was a wilderness. Yet we are proud of some of the feats performed in the war by the arms of Vermont. We count upon ourselves as principals in the capture of the whole British Army under Burgoyne, the consequence of which are well known, too well known to be known as needing a rehearsal. The state of Vermont cannot show to you large towns and cities, but it can show to you what is perhaps of as much consequence. It can show to you a sober, substantial, intelligent, and well-informed yeomanry. We most fervently join the prayer of a whole nation that you may return in health and safety across the ocean to the bosom of your family, and that the blessing of God may attend you through the remainder of your life.
The throng undoubtedly had the same response to the real Elijah Payne. And I want to thank you, Howard, for invoking such a spirited address, because I now present you the Marquis de Lafayette.
Excellences, Monsieur le Maire, mon cher Monsieur Payne, distinguished guests, Mesdames et Messieurs, Monsieur, I most cordially thank you for the friendly and flattering manner in which you are pleased to express the feelings of the people of this state. A most gratifying specimen of their goodness I now have the gratification to witness. I thank you for your sympathy and the delight I feel to see the happy citizens of Vermont enjoying all the blessings of Republican liberty, and among them to recognize many of my beloved companions in arms. Be pleased to accept in your own name and in behalf of the people and representatives of Vermont the tribute of my respectful devotion and gratitude. The welcome I received from the citizens of Montpelier, the great number of friends who are at this late hour have been pleased to wait my arrival, and a particular gratification to hear their affectionate feelings expressed by you. My dear sir, fill my heart with the most lively sentiments of pleasure and gratitude. But licentiousness, huh? Well, may I, sir, acknowledge the patriotic titles of this state, not only as having been the theater of a most important event, the victory at Bennington, and having largely contributed to the affairs in the North, and also as having, by her devotion to the general cause and by the gallantry of her hardy sons, constantly taken a great proportionate share in our revolutionary struggle. Nor shall I omit this opportunity to express my early interest in the local feelings and wishes of the state of Vermont. Monsieur, I have now accomplished one of the greatest objects of my life. I have visited the 24 states of the Union. I have been a happy witness of the immense, rapid, and ever-increasing results of independence, Republican institution, and self-government with you, Monsieur, and all whom I have the pleasure to address. I most cordially congratulate on the public and domestic happiness which is enjoyed by the citizens of Vermont. And I beg you to accept my affectionate and respectful thanks. To Vermont, Montpelier, and the Green Mountains, from early echoed and valiantly supported by the Republican cry for independence and freedom, may its happy result be more and more enjoyed by the sons of the Green Mountains. Merci.
Governor Van Ness, rather than retaking the podium, wants the legislature to invoke their joint resolution passed just in the last session that has just concluded. And one of Montpelier's representatives, Connor Casey, will read said joint resolution honoring this occasion, honoring Lafayette's visit to Montpelier. I suppose those of us from Calais will start saying Calais. Am I right? Is it going to be Calais from now on? And I see the tricolors and our friends up in Canada. We have a lot to be grateful for from both nations. Here is Representative Connor Casey.
Thank you very much. And, General, it's a pure pleasure to welcome you to the capital city of Vermont here. Every free step we take, we walk in your footprints, and I hope you know you'll always have a home here in Montpelier. It's a fairly voluminous resolution, so I'll read it fast. But the House concurrent resolution commemorating the bicentennial of the 1824-1825 Farewell American Tour of the Marquis de Lafayette. Whereas the Marquis de Lafayette was a French aristocrat who audaciously, at 19 years of age, set sail for America and amazingly persuaded Congress to commission him as a Major General in the Continental Army. And whereas Lafayette fought bravely in the Battle of Brandywine, where he was wounded in Rhode Island before returning to France to lobby the French government to increase support for the American cause. And whereas, upon his return to the United States, Lafayette, leading a contingent of American troops, blocked British General Lord Cornwallis's early action during the decisive Battle of Yorktown. And whereas, Lafayette aspired someday to return to the nation whose independence he helped secure, and in 1924, President James Monroe and Congress invited Lafayette to tour the country in celebration of the Revolutionary War's 50th anniversary, which became a 24-state sojourn, beginning in New York on August 15th and concluding in Burlington on June 29th. And whereas Lafayette arrived in Vermont on June 28th, 1825, and was welcomed in an early morning ceremony in Windsor, journeyed through Heartland to an event in Woodstock, traveled to East Barter on his way to Royalton, where more official greetings awaited, and continued through Tunbridge to Barrie, from where a more elaborate entourage accompanied him to Montpelier, and from the first State House's balcony, he observed a military procession, delivered a speech to the General Assembly's chamber, and attended a great banquet in his honor, and a historic marker now commemorates Lafayette's Montpelier visit. And whereas, on June 29th, Lafayette's American tour, after passing through Williston, concluded in Burlington, where the festivities consisted of large receptions, laying the cornerstone of the University of Vermont's Old Mill building, greetings from Governor Van Ness, and the delivery of the English-fluent Frenchman's carefully written Farewell America speech in appreciation and reflection. And whereas the American Friends of Lafayette has organized a bicentennial recreation of the 19th century tour, following in the original route of the day, including the Vermont stops on June 28th through 29th, 2025. Now therefore it be resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives that the General Assembly commemorates the bicentennial of the 1824 to 1825 Farewell American Tour of the Marquis de Lafayette. And be it further resolved that the Secretary of State be directed to send a copy of this resolution to the American Friends of Lafayette. And with that, General, we thank you for everything you've done, all your magnificent achievements. And I would like to, on behalf of the entire Montpelier delegation and the Vermont General Assembly, present you with this resolution. Thank you very much.
Connecticut to Rhode Island all those years ago.
Anyone who fights the Brits is okay with us.
As many of you know, Connor is an award-winning playwright, among other things. So what a great dramatic reading from you, Connor. We're wrapping this part of the program, and yet I have to call out Tim German, who has been the Vermont representative on the ground for the Friends of Lafayette, who's made all of his visits possible. Tim German. And without further ado, the really interesting part of this program, which the Vermont Historical Society is now going to present, I'll allow Steve to explain. Steve Perkins.
So David said a lot of what I was going to say, and I'm going to say pretend that you have now walked over from the lawn and you're tired, you've been standing out in the sun, so you have to have a nice seat here in the Snelling room to relax and enjoy some refreshments, which I think you've already enjoyed, so we're done with that part of the program at this point. But anyway, as I said before, I'm the director of the Vermont Historical Society, Steve Perkins, welcoming you to the Snelling room, as David said, a recreation of the 19th century iteration of the hotel that stood on this spot. The hotel where Marquis de Lafayette had a large dinner reception when staying overnight here in Montpelier. And though some people think he stayed here, he did not. He stayed at the Caldwell House, which is, well, let's just call it at the corner of State and Main, down there that way. There's a plaque, you can go find it and take a look at that spot. I was going to again also thank Tim for all of his hard work in putting this program together. And in addition to the organizational work, the research work. I don't know how many hours I've spent in the library of the Vermont Historical Society looking through documents, and we have some wonderful documents there, pulling out primary sources, what folks who were at the event wrote about later in life or passed on to them. And even I'm trying to look around, there's a picture painting in here. This little guy right here, Clark Day, met the Marquis de Lafayette at his father's house. His father was Ira Day in Barrie, where horses were changed, and was at the event, and that's a picture of Clark Day. As I said before, when I was trying to kill time, we have some artifacts out here in the small case in the museum and a larger display of archival material at the library in Barrie. So please make it a point to come out and visit the Vermont History Center in Barrie as well to get your Lafayette fix. Tim sent me a few little pieces that he was worried people wouldn't say in any of their speeches. So a couple of research items that were pulled out of letters and speeches, and of course some of these things have been passed down over time, so we have to take it with a little bit of grain of salt. But Admiral Dewey, I think many of us remember who that guy was. Well, his father, Julius Dewey, was here when Marquis de Lafayette came through. And related to his son, who then related to the press, that one of the things that the Marquis asked as circulating through the crowd as he looked at, especially speaking to gentlemen, would ask, "Are you married?" And if the answer was yes, the Marquis answered, happy man. If the answer no, his answer was, let me get this right, lucky fellow. Another relation of how the Marquis interacted with the veterans here on the grounds. Of course, there was a large gathering of residents and veterans came to Montpelier to greet the Marquis. So resident Hinckley Bernard Chapin wrote in a letter that was then published that as the Marquis circulated amongst veterans, he asked them, are you a veteran? And under what general did you serve? And one of the veterans replied, well, under Johnny Burgoyne, sir. God bless him. Apparently this was much to the crowd's merriment, because we're 50 years on at this point. But this was a Germanic mercenary who had fought with Burgoyne's troops, and after the war ended up settling in Montpelier and became a well-loved member of society. So it was all in good fun. So a couple of the things that we can find in some of the primary source documents that we have at the Vermont Historical Society. So that's probably enough for me at this point. And we're going to move on to, shall I call it a lecture, a talk, some conveying of great information about the Marquis de Lafayette. So it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Alan Hoffman. Alan Hoffman obtained his bachelor's in history from Yale, where he studied under Professor Edmund Morgan before earning his JD at Harvard Law School. He practiced law in Boston for 50 years. He was a very avid reader of early history, and he discovered, I suppose those are his words, Lafayette in 2002, and spent 2 years, 2003 to 2005, translating Auguste Levasseur's Lafayette in America in 1824 and 1825, the first-hand account of Lafayette's farewell tour to America, written by his private secretary. This translation was published in 2006 and is in its third printing. Alan Hoffman's lectured widely in Lafayette and has spoken in each of the 24 states and Washington, D.C., which Lafayette visited during the farewell tour. He's an officer of 2 Lafayette societies, and he currently serves as the president of the American Friends of Lafayette and the president of the Massachusetts Lafayette Society. He is also the editor of the Gazette of the American Friends of Lafayette, and he'll be speaking on Lafayette and human rights.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure it is to be here with this amazing crowd that have assembled to see the return of General Lafayette. I'd like to give a couple of nods to my colleagues. First, Peter Riley. As you just heard, he is not the overall head of the American Friends of Lafayette. This happens to be all the time because I have such great people working for me. And as a recovering lawyer, I just wanted to correct the record. But he's the inspiration and the founder of our Farewell Tour Bicentennial Program. In 2016, he buttonholed me at an annual meeting of the American Friends of Lafayette, and he said, and I quote, "Alan, what are we going to do about the bicentennial?" 2016, 8 years ago. And I said, "What bicentennial?" He said, "The farewell tour." "Oh, the farewell tour bicentennial." That was really the germ of it. He was the initial co-chair of the committee. We weren't doing as great a job as we liked, so I asked our executive director, whose name is Chuck Schwam, who we could appoint overall chair, and he says, why don't I do it? And I said, "You're willing to do it?" And he said, "Sure." Now, this executive director is the only one I know of who does it pretty much full-time and is unpaid. None of us are paid. None of us have a salary. He also has a full-time job, and he did an incredible job. Incredible job. He formed 40 committees. When Zoom appeared, he started using it. In the last year or two, frequently, he'd have 10 to 15 Zoom meetings a week. And it was really a combination of people's efforts that led to this whole program. And Peter, it is true, Peter is the overall chair of the New England part of the farewell tour. And in the 4 states of Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, after this week, we will have completed 65 events between the ones we held in 2024 and the ones we are holding in 2025. So I'd like to give Peter a round of applause. And of course, the inimitable Tim German, who I called Tom for a number of months. Anyhow, he's been wonderful. He took a tremendous burden off of Peter's plate, really, by becoming, in effect, the chair of the Vermont Committee. and he's done an incredible job, and I think he deserves a round of applause. So I came to Lafayette in 2002 by virtue of a book written by Andrew Burstein about the 50th anniversary of the country, and the whole first chapter was about the farewell tour. And I said to myself, what was all the fuss about? I mean, I knew who Lafayette was. I'd taken about 5 or 6 or 7 courses in early American history, but I'd never heard of the farewell tour. It's nowhere in the general history books. So that was my start, but I started reading everything that I could find, and pretty soon I became incredibly interested and impressed by his human rights record. And as I said to some people this morning, in my opinion, he's the leading human rights advocate of his generation, and there's no close second, and that was from 1777 to 1834. So I will focus today on his anti-slavery advocacy, and the subtitle of this talk is, well, I'll give you the whole title, Lafayette and the Anti-Slavery Cause to Ameliorate the Condition of the Distressed. Now, during Lafayette's farewell tour in 1824 and 1825, Americans not only acknowledged his important role in the American Revolution, but also lauded him for his universal approach to the betterment of the human race. In Pembroke, New Hampshire, on June 22, 1825, just a few days ago, Stephen Webster, Daniel Webster's brother, said, quote, "We admire the persevering activity with which you have sought all possible occasions to ameliorate the condition of the distressed." In Concord, New Hampshire, on the following day, actually the same day in the afternoon, a banquet of 700 was held on the State House lawn. There were 35 toasts. The wine was flowing frequently on that day. And one toaster described Lafayette as, quote, "the universal philanthropist." His human rights portfolio included such causes as national revolutions to create independent nation states, religious freedom, anti-slavery advocacy, rights of women, support of Native Americans, prison reform, and opposition to the death penalty. But at the core of his human rights advocacy was Lafayette's 50-year opposition to slavery. Yet, when the 19-year-old freedom fighter arrived in South Carolina in June of 1777 to join the American Revolution, he was at best a blank slate and at worst naive and obtuse with respect to chattel slavery. In a letter to his wife from Charlestown, dated June 19, 1777, he wrote, "In America, there are no paupers or even the sort of people we call peasants. Every individual has an adequate amount of property, a considerable number of Negroes, and the same rights as the most powerful proprietor in the land." 7 years later, however, on October 17, 1784, James Madison, who had spent a month traveling with Lafayette during the first of his 2 victory laps across America, wrote to Thomas Jefferson that one of Lafayette's 3 hobby horses in politics was the manumission of slaves. The others were the alliance between France and America and the Union of the United States. In the sense used by Madison, hobby horse, which is a child's toy, means preoccupation or obsession. Lafayette's evolution on the issue of slavery is traceable principally to his experience with African Americans in the American Army. First, he commanded troops that had African Americans among them. Studies have shown that about 7,500 African Americans served on the American side in the American Revolution. But in this regard, the 1st Rhode Island Regiment stands out. It consisted of enslaved blacks and Native Americans whom Rhode Island recruited by promising them their freedom if they served the entire war. They were trying to meet their quota for the Continental Army. This regiment saw combat in August of 1778 in the Rhode Island campaign an unsuccessful effort by the Americans to take back Newport from the British. They came under Lafayette's direct command in September when he was assigned to defend the mainland from a possible British attack. The survivors were part of the Rhode Island Regiment, the combined Rhode Island 1st and 2nd because of attrition, and they served under Lafayette's overall command in the siege of Yorktown. When Lafayette was visiting New Orleans in April of 1825, he requested a meeting with African-American veterans of the War of 1812. According to the Courier, which was a newspaper in New Orleans, of April 19, 1825, quote, "The general received the men of color with demonstrations of esteem and affection, and said to them, quote, 'Gentlemen, I have often during the War of Independence seen African blood shed with honor in our ranks for the cause of the United States. I have learned with the liveliest interest how you answered the appeal of General Jackson, what a glorious use you made of your arms for the defense of Louisiana. I cherish the sentiments of gratitude for your services and of admiration for your valor. Accept those also of my personal friendship and of the pleasure I shall always experience in meeting with you again.' The general then kindly shook hands with them all and thanked the governor for the opportunity he had given him to become acquainted with them. Second, there is Lafayette's relationship with James, an enslaved man whom his owner, William Armistead, volunteered for service under Lafayette during the Virginia campaign in 1781. James proved to be a reliable double agent in General Cornwallis's camp. Among other intelligence that he provided to Lafayette was the news that the British would be fortifying Yorktown. In 1784, while Lafayette was in Virginia in his first post-Revolutionary War visit to the United States, he wrote a testimonial in support of James' petition for his freedom. Now, Virginia had an act that would give freedom to African Americans who actually served in the Continental Army. James did not qualify because he was a spy. In this petition, Lafayette outlined the important services that James had provided. In 1787, the Virginia legislature, relying on this petition, granted James his freedom. James was so grateful to the general that he took his surname and called himself James Lafayette, or as some historians now believe, based on pension documents that he signed, James Fayette. In either case, it was named for Lafayette. During the farewell tour at Yorktown on October 18, 1824, Lafayette spied James in the crowd that had assembled to greet him on his return to Yorktown after 43 years. According to the Richmond Enquirer, quote, "A black man even, who had rendered him services by way of information as a spy, for which he was liberated by the state, was recognized by him in the crowd, called to him by name, and taken into his embrace." Such public displays of interracial infection were rare not only in the antebellum South, but also in the North. As William Cooper Nell, an African-American historian and abolitionist, wrote in his book, Colored Patriots of the American Revolution in 1855, Lafayette, quote, "was not tainted with American colorphobia." As early as February 1783, Lafayette's view on slavery was substantially evolving. In a letter to his mentor, George Washington, he proposed a plan which might become greatly beneficial to the black part of mankind. He wrote, "Let us unite in purchasing a small estate where we may try the experiment to free the Negroes and use them only as tenants. Such an example as yours might render it a general practice, and if we succeed in America, I will cheerfully devote a part of my time to render the method fashionable in the West Indies." And then he wrote, and I love this line, "If it be a wild scheme, I had rather be mad that way than be thought wise on the other tack." Although Washington replied that the proposal, quote, "is a striking evidence of the benevolence of your heart and expressed to William to join his protege in so laudable a work, he never did. Instead, in 1785 and 1786, Lafayette purchased plantations in Cayenne in the French colony of Guyana on the northern coast of South America. There he hired an overseer and gave him strict instructions as to the lenient treatment of black workers and the implementation of a policy of education, pay, and gradual emancipation of the workers. Sadly, this experiment came to an abrupt end when Lafayette's properties were confiscated in late 1792 after the radicals took power in France. Lafayette had fled from France to the Austrian Netherlands in August of 1792. He was imprisoned for 5 years by Prussian and Austrian monarchies. The importance to Lafayette of this emancipation project is illustrated by a letter that he wrote to his wife's relative from prison in Montpelier, Prussia, in March of 1793. Lacking information about the status of his wife and children in Jacobin, France, he wrote, "I do not know what has happened to my plantation in Cayenne, but I hope that my wife will see to it that the blacks who farm it preserve their freedom." During the late 1780s, before the French Revolution and his subsequent imprisonment, Lafayette had joined the abolitionist societies in 3 countries. France, where he joined the Société des Amis des Noirs, Society of the Friends of the Blacks; England; and the United States, where he enrolled in the New York Manumission Society, which Alexander Hamilton and John Jay had founded. One biographer, Jason Lane, noted that in 1788, Lafayette would become the first person to be involved in the abolition movement on an international level. With respect to his American friends who relied on chattel slavery, Lafayette spoke truth to power. In the wake of the controversy over allowing slavery into the territories in the newly formed states that led to the Missouri Compromise in 1820, ex-President Jefferson, who was one of Lafayette's closest friends, wrote Lafayette to explain his theory of diffusion. Jefferson believed that slavery should be allowed in all the new territories. He argued that the expansion of slavery would alleviate overcrowding in the tidewater regions, and conditions for enslaved workers there and in the new territories would be ameliorated. Lafayette's response in a letter dated July 1, 1821, to one of his closest American friends, seems somewhat scathing. "Are you sure, my dear friend, that extending the principle of slavery to the newly raised states is a method to facilitate the means of getting rid of it? I would have thought that by spreading the prejudices, habits, and calculations of planters over a larger surface, you rather increase the difficulties of final liberation. Was it not for that deplorable circumstance of Negro slavery in the southern states, not a word could be objected when we present American doctrines and constitutions as an example to old Europe." Nearly 50 years after Lafayette's farewell tour of visits to Monticello in 1824 and 1825, Israel Gillette Jefferson, a former enslaved worker there, wrote about a carriage ride with the general and the ex-president. Lafayette remarked that he thought that the slaves ought to be free, that no man could rightfully hold ownership in his brother man, that he gave his best services to and spent money on behalf of the Americans freely because he felt they were fighting for a great and noble principle, the freedom of mankind, that instead of being free, a portion were held in bondage, which seemed to grieve his noble heart, that it would be mutually beneficial to masters and slaves if the latter were educated. This conversation was very gratifying to me, and I treasured it up in my heart. At Montpelier in 1824, Lafayette engaged James Madison and his neighbors in a debate over the issue of slavery. Lafayette lobbied his friend Chief Justice John Marshall by sending him an anti-slavery pamphlet in 1825 entitled, by Benjamin Lundy, and it was entitled "A Plan for the gradual abolition of slavery in the United States. Although his anti-slavery views were well known in America, Lafayette did not generally publicly advocate for them during his 13-month farewell tour in 1824 and 1825. He likely pulled his punches in deference to many of his hosts, yet he repeatedly took actions, privately and in public, which signaled that African Americans should be treated with a recognition of their dignity as human beings. He greeted or was greeted by African Americans in many places, including New York City, Troy, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Yorktown, Virginia, Columbia, South Carolina, Savannah, and Concord, New Hampshire. In Manhattan, in September of 1824, Lafayette visited the African Free School, the creation of the New York Manumission Society, of which he was a member. There, the star pupil, James McCune Smith, an 11-year-old enslaved boy. Now, New York had passed gradual emancipation in the 1790s, but it was conditional, and it didn't finally come into effect really until 1827. Boys and men continued to be enslaved for 25 or 28 years, and women for 25 years. So the star pupil, James McCune, was enslaved, James McCune Smith, when he gave this welcoming address. Quote, General Lafayette, in behalf of myself and my fellow schoolmates, may I be permitted to express our sincere and respectful gratitude to you for the condescension you have manifested this day in visiting this institution, which is one of the noblest specimens of New York philanthropy. Here, sir, you behold hundreds of the poor children of Africa. There were 400 to 500 students present that day, sharing with those of a lighter hue in the blessings of education. And while it will be our pleasures to remember the great deeds that you have done for America, it will be our delight to cherish the memory of General Lafayette as a friend to African emancipation and as a member of this institution. McCune Smith was the first African American to earn a medical degree. He had to go to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland to obtain the degree, and he opened the first black-owned pharmacy in New York. He also wrote important scientific papers and was an abolitionist and a close friend and associate of Frederick Douglass. During the farewell tour, a number of southern cities and towns had passed ordinances or made proclamations prohibiting blacks, enslaved or free, from attending public events like parades or militia reviews involving Lafayette because of concerns about his possible influence on them. Columbia, South Carolina may have been one of them. After the parade and the militia review on March 11, 1825, there was a reception for Columbia's elite society in a private home. Pompey Fortune, a free black who as an enslaved man had waited on Lafayette in South Carolina when he first arrived in 1777, barged into the reception asking for Lafayette. According to an account by a militiaman who was present, Lafayette recognized Pompey, shook his hand, and, quote, called for a glass of champagne, which that worthy took with great dignity. Afterwards, Pompey said goodbye, and they shook hands again. By the way, those Southern officials were right to be concerned. Lewis Hayden was an enslaved boy in Lexington, Kentucky, when Lafayette arrived in May of 1825. He told this story in a memoir which he wrote late in life. Hayden was standing on a fence on Lafayette's route. When the general passed by, he bowed toward the fence that the boy was on. Hayden looked around, saw he was alone on the fence. He was so frightened that he ran to a different, more crowded location under the guns that were to give the military salute. He concluded, Lafayette was the most famous man I had ever heard of, and you can imagine how I felt, a slave boy, to be favored with his recognition. This act burnt his image upon my heart so that I shall never need a permit to recall it. I date my hatred of slavery from that day, and I tell you that after I allowed no moving thing on the face of the earth to stand between me and my freedom. Hayden escaped to Boston, became a leading abolitionist, and later, after the Civil War, a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives. The house where Hayden and his wife Harriet lived is on the African American Freedom Trail in Boston. Lafayette even had a posthumous influence on the abolition movement. A statement attributed to him by his good friend, the British abolitionist Thomas Clarkson, was published in 1846. At this time, as a result of the farewell tour, Lafayette was by far the most popular man in America. Clarkson said in a letter published in the Liberator on January 2, 1846, that Lafayette, quote, was decidedly as uncompromising as any on the subject of slavery. He has said frequently, quote, I would never have drawn my sword in the cause of America if I could have conceived that thereby I was founding a land of slavery. Lafayette's popularity in 1846 is exemplified by the publication of a full-color broadside in New York entitled Pictorial History of the United States, with the seals of the states and territories on the perimeter and printed information about population statistics, famous battles of the American Revolution and the War of 1812, and a list of eminent men. 3 figures dominate the field: Washington in the middle, Franklin to Washington's left, and Lafayette on his good right hand. Not Jefferson, Adams, Hamilton, Madison, or even Jackson, but Lafayette. Between 1846 and 1865, abolitionists like Charles Sumner and Wendell Phillips quoted Lafayette's anti-slavery lament in speeches and publications. A broadside quoting Lafayette's lament, amplified by exclamation points which were not in the original, was published in Boston in the 1850s. This broadside, which is now in the William Lloyd Garrison collection of the Boston Public Library, was observed on the wall of a memorial service for John Brown at the very end of 1859 in the city of Boston. Wendell Phillips, the celebrated orator of the abolition movement, when asked for his autograph, customarily wrote a statement of a famous person, attributed the statement to the source, then signed his name below. He most often quoted John Brown. For example, Phillips is known to have written this above his own autograph. John Brown taught these lines to each of his children: peace if possible, justice at any time. In May of 1864, Phillips paraphrased Lafayette's anti-slavery lament, quote, I would never have drawn my sword in the cause of America if I had thought that thereby I was helping to found a nation of slaves. Then Phillips wrote Lafayette and signed his name under it. He handed it to one of his admirers, and it came down to us. Along with, right alongside of it, an engraving of Wendell Phillips with a facsimile signature, so you could see that it was really Wendell Phillips' signature on this piece of paper. So it was that the abolitionists used Lafayette, perhaps the most popular man in America, to advance their cause decades after his death in 1834. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank everyone for being here. Tim said the General would be happy to answer any questions, if there were any questions from the audience before we let you go.
What was the name of your horse?
Lequel, monsieur? I had so many, I can't possibly answer this. Some of them shut down from under me.
Did you keep a journal during your trip?
Did I keep a journal during my trip? No, madam, I have a secretary for that. And indeed, Monsieur Auguste Lasseur is accompanying me. We are a very small party. Many people wish to have accompanied me from France, and I did not want to give the appearance of an official entourage. And so my party is limited to myself, my son George Washington, my secretary, Auguste de Vasseur, and my valet, Sébastien or Bastien, as we call it. And Monsieur Levasseur has been most assiduous in sending information back to France, but my understanding is that these dispatches are not being published in the French press. So perhaps my expectation is when we return to France, Monsieur Levasseur will compile all of his notes into memoirs that will be published at a later date. Monsieur.
The curator mentioned before that some of our history is hard to get at. We don't have enough research. We found that to be true in Vermont. And I saw one letter that said, oh, Secretary Levasseur was sick the whole time he was in Vermont and just couldn't wait to get out. And there seemed to be less in his marvelous 2-volume history, which Mr. Hockman translated. It's an amazing, highly recommended reading. Are you aware of any health issues that he had, or just being tired at the end of the trip?
No, not more than usual. But of course, we are nearing this is the 10th month of our trip, and what Monsieur Levasseur is capturing most often in his notations for publication letter are our impressions of what we are seeing. Your newspapers are very, very faithful in reporting all of the events, not just these events, where I receive and address and I respond. And Monsieur Levasseur is noting often the impressions that he has or that we have in discussion that he will then write down. And for that he will construct, as I said, memoir, not necessarily an accounting of our trip, but our perspectives and viewpoints of what we had seen. Madam.
It seems like you spent a very short amount of time in Vermont on your trip. Are there some places where you stayed for a number of weeks and met with people who you knew from before, or were you passing through every place very quickly?
Well, it would depend on what part of the séjour we are talking about. I last winter spent a great deal of time in Washington City and in Virginia because it is winter time. It is very difficult to move around. And of course, in the city is where the capital is now. And in Virginia, where many of my good friends who were very elderly now from the revolution still reside. And so during that period, it was very calm. We did not travel that much. We were able to stay several days with Mr. Jefferson at Monticello, several days with Mr. Madison, again at Montpelier. Montpelier, I think he calls it as well. As well as other locations there. And in Washington City, I've had many opportunities to see the president, to see Mr. Monroe as well often, as well as the French ambassador. And so my time there was more leisurely spent. However, when I reached the southern states, when the invitations to me came, I had to take my time where I could because of limitations in travel, but then other times I had to keep watch carefully on the calendar because I made a promise to the people of Boston that I should return by the 16th of June, 1825, for the dedication of the cornerstone laying of the monument at Montpelier, which I was present for that 2 weeks ago. And it is a great satisfaction to me that I was able to participate in that, which unfortunately necessitated that I perhaps go at a faster pace than I would have enjoyed on my own to places like Kentucky and Ohio. Monsieur.
It's my understanding that slavery in France existed when you were a young man and throughout your life, but there were certain parts of the country where it was eliminated as a legal thing compared to other parts of the country. Did you live to see the end of slavery in France, the complete end of slavery?
No, monsieur, just as we have not seen the end of it in New York and other places in this country. And in fact, we do not have slavery in metropolitan France, but we do in our colonies. And at this time we are talking about the islands, the Sugar Islands in the Caribbean. places like Saint-Domingue. Well, previously Saint-Domingue, now it is, I cannot tell you if it is the Kingdom of the Empire or the Republic in what they call Haiti now. But we had, of course, very large planting communities in the islands of Martinique, Guadeloupe, Saint-Domingue, and other smaller islands in the Caribbean. So that is where the slavery was based in the French, in France, essentially, but not in metropolitan France. Monsieur, tout au fond.
Can you tell us about your association with George Washington?
Yes, monsieur, my association with George Washington was very much like a father and a son. I considered him my adopted father. My own father, as you know, was killed at the Battle of Minden during the 7 Years' War, and I did not know him. I was not even 3 years old when this occurred. And as you know, His Excellency did not have children of his own either. So when I first met him, and perhaps it was the impetuousness of youth and my exuberant jubilation at being named the Major General in the Continental Army, I boldly went up and introduced myself to him at a dinner in a tavern in Philadelphia. And he responded to me, my dear Marquis, I know who you are, I've heard of you. To which I was completely overwhelmed, because why would such a great man, a great personage of such importance to the Continental Army and the bid for independence even at that stage know of me, a young Frenchman who had come and had been accepted, but without command of soldiers. But after that, the relationship was formed, the bond was formed, and continued throughout my association with him. When I saw him in life in 1785, and in correspondence until his death in 1799, even from prison. Monsieur.
How did you get the name Marquis?
Well, it is not a name, monsieur, it is a title. In English, you call it Marquis, in German, it's Markgraf. It is a title, and so my name is actually, my family name is Dumoutier. It's Dumoutier, Marquis de Lafayette. And when I renounced the title, but I kept the name of the title as part of my name. And so I became Dumoutier de Lafayette, without a title. And that is how I prefer to live, without the title of Marquis. Madame.
General, you, in traveling to this country, colonies at the point that you did, you were giving up a life of incredible wealth, as I understand. And I just see people in this country very intoxicated by wealth, and I'm wondering what motivated you to take that step. It's such a leap.
Let me be somewhat self-deprecating by saying I did not give up my wealth, madame. I may have given up the privilege of living in France with such wealth at my disposal. But I found it was a better use of my wealth to devote part of it, a small part, by the way, into following what I believe was the destiny of this country and my destiny to help in assisting this country achieve its independence from Great Britain, to assert its rights, to give people here more of a say in their government, to allow them to choose the form of government on which they will govern. And so for me to leave was quite natural. I did not expect I would ever return to France. And in fact, people ask me now, will you stay here or will you return to France? And I have to answer to them, I am French, I will have to return to France because I am not, even now, with the state of politics in France, I am not unconvinced that France itself will not at some point be able to install and institute the same principles of democracy and freedom and republicanism that you have here in this country, in France, in the American version of this. And that's important because there are republics that exist that are ruled by tyrants. You can elect a tyrant to public office in these republics.
Could I follow up with, just follow up on a question that I stated it poorly. You didn't give up your wealth, you gave up comfort and safety.
Yes,
and,
indeed.
And I wonder what motivated you to do that?
Because when I heard of the friction and the turmoil that was brewing between the American colonies and the colony of Great Britain to me, this was the embodiment, this was the physical manifestation of the struggle, the rightful, justified struggle of men, women, mankind, searching to restore itself to the natural order of things as described under the philosopher of Enlightenment, Voltaire, Rousseau, etc. The natural state of man is to be free. And so for me, the American colonists standing up to what they considered to be oppression and tyranny was the manifestation physically against something that is unnatural in my opinion. And I wanted to see that, I wanted to be part of it. And that is why I was very capable of coming here to do what I did and giving up for a time the comforts of what I experienced living in France and as a nobleman in the late 18th century. Monsieur.
Given your the event you'll be attending tomorrow morning, where you'll just be meeting with the ladies, can you talk about your attitude towards the rights of women?
Well, first of all, I can no more understand how it is possible that women do not have the same capacity intellectually as men, should not have the same rights as men to inherit property, to receive an education especially. And therefore, it is incomprehensible to me why these things are even questioned. Your own Declaration of Independence states that all men are created equal, and you have to understand at the time this is the expression used, men is used in terms of mankind, and means men and women of all races, of all creeds. And so for me, it is natural that women should have the same rights as men. In this country, I see that you are on the right track here. You are founding and you are establishing, and they are underway now, female seminaries. I visited several of them in various places I have seen just in the last 10 months. It is something you should be proud of, because it is only through education that young women will become what young men can become in this country and in Europe. In Europe, we have very few of these institutions. And yes, there are institutions for ladies, for young ladies, but it is not the same thing. They are not studying mathematics, they are not studying the sciences, they are not studying classical literature, classical languages, the rest of it, the way that you are able to do here. And so this is something of which you should be very, very proud. Madame.
So we know that your greatest disappointment on this trip back was seeing that slavery was persisting in America. And I'm just wondering, what was your greatest joy to see happening in America? What were you happy about in terms of how America was developing in this period?
Madame, look around you. You will have now the state of Vermont. They did not exist the last time I was here. These are the things that are the most joyous occasions I find in this voyage, is to see that now there are 24 states in the Union, 11 more added since the last time I left you. It is proof to me that the principles for which we fought, the American concepts of freedom, liberty, have taken root here, and they are leading to prosperity, happiness. These are all indicators, in my opinion, that the war that we fought, the war of the revolution, was worth it. It was justified. Just look at the result. All of you are here. You live freely. You are not governed from a foreign power, from overseas. You have your own government here within your state. You have a national government that seeks to your protection, as was mentioned by Monsieur Payne just a moment ago. So though that is the greatest joy, I will tell you, I have seen, is the great improvements, along with this prosperity of which I was speaking. I have witnessed the growth and construction of grand canals, roads, navigation on rivers. The science of invention has produced something such as a steamboat. This was unheard of when I was here last. Despite the fact that the one I was on sank in the Ohio River, and notwithstanding, I have been on several others that had no such calamity, and it is a marvel, madame. And I can only imagine what the freedom of living in a society like this will mean in the future in terms of your capabilities to look ahead, to forecast, to invent, and create, and further your own advancement in these fields. Again, your own prosperity, both at the personal, but at the national level as well.
Thank you all very much for being with us today, and thank you to all of our speakers. There are more events tomorrow, so check out the website. Am I going to get it right, Tim? We've got Waterbury, we've got Williston, we've got Essex, Colchester, Winooski, Burlington. So all on the calendar for tomorrow, so if you'd like to follow, more events to come. Thank you very much.